Chapter 1. Edward Hale's limp body was carefully lifted onto the stretcher and maneuvered into the ambulance by two paramedics. The bleeding had slowed under pressure, though it was far from under control. Rachael Brown stood like a statue a few meters from the ambulance, being questioned by the police. She was wide-eyed, her hands trembled violently and were coated in a red, sticky substance. Yellow and black chevron tape with the words "Police, keep out" cordoned off the scene of the crime, sealing in the chaos. A knife lay vivid with blood inside a sealed evidence bag, already labeled. A small crowd had gathered beyond the cordon. Phones were raised. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen Smith, a neighbor, was crying openly now, shaking as she clutched the arm of an officer who spoke to her in low, urgent tones. Nothing seemed to calm her. Moments later, the ambulance doors slammed shut. Sirens cut through the evening air as the vehicle pulled away. The ambulance jolted and the monitors squealed before settling as it wove through rush-hour traffic towards St. Margaret's Accident and Emergency. Edward Hale remained unconscious despite the paramedics' efforts. Charlotte sat by his side in the ambulance. Tears streamed down her face. Her hands wrung in that nervous, habitual way they always did when she felt utterly powerless. She had done it often growing up, covering for Edward, especially after nights like the one when he went partying at 14. She had been left a nervous wreck covering up for him. She couldn't believe how fragile he looked, hooked up to machines and fighting for survival. How had their worlds collided so violently with this grim reality? Minutes later, the ambulance screeched to a halt outside the hospital. The paramedics flung open the doors. Urgency pulsed through every movement. They transferred the stretcher with practiced care and rushed Edward past the double doors. He was wheeled into the trauma bay. Bandages had slowed the bleeding, but his lips had turned an ominous shade of blue. A whirlwind of activity ensued. One young nurse, her composure steady despite the tension, felt for a pulse and exhaled sharply with relief when she found one. Another nurse strapped a blood pressure cuff to his arm, reading the numbers with a furrowed brow. "Hypovolemic shock," she said, her tone clinical and urgent. Bright lights flashed in Edward's pupils as another nurse recorded her observations. A doctor in green scrubs entered with swift authority. "Get him into theatre," he ordered. "We need the anaesthetist ready. Someone call the blood bank. Type and cross-match. 4 units of O negative now." Charlotte stood nearby. Her world seemed to crumble around her. Her brother, Edward. She had been more like a mother to him than a sister. Their parents had been too consumed by their careers to offer more than fleeting moments of care, leaving Charlotte to fill the gap. "You can't go, Edward. You must pull through. Don't leave me. Not like this," she pleaded. A young nurse gently placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder and guided her to the side. Edward's stretcher was surrounded now by a healthcare assistant and 2 porters. Their coordinated movements were swift as they pushed him past the white double doors leading to theatre. "He needs to go in immediately. His vitals are critical," the nurse explained softly before disappearing into the flurry of activity. In the distance, someone called out, "Is he allergic to anything?" "Not that I know of," Charlotte offered. "Except if he developed something recently," she added as an afterthought. "Has anyone asked his partner?" another voice chimed in. "The paramedics said the police are questioning her," a porter said quietly. Charlotte flinched. A bespectacled doctor in scrubs strode past, firing rapid questions at 2 female colleagues who followed closely behind him. They answered with quick, confident responses before vanishing through the same double doors Edward had been taken through. Charlotte's hands trembled as she stared at those doors. She willed herself to believe that beyond them they were fighting to save him, that somehow, against the odds, Edward would pull through. In the operating theatre, Edward's body lay still under the bright surgical lights, the room filled with the steady beep of monitors and an efficient clinical team dubbed Saviours in scrubs. The nickname stuck after a panorama investigation revealed that the surgical team had operated on more than 1,000 knife victims in just 3 years, with very high survival rates. The team moved with the calm of being accustomed to knife trauma and carefully transferred Edward to the operating table. Mr. Oliver Kensington, a 60-year-old veteran surgeon, washed his hands meticulously before donning his scrubs. A nurse cleaned the wound as Mr. Kensington prepared for what would be a delicate procedure, though one he had performed many times on patients from the capital. The wound was deep, a 4-inch incision perilously close to his patient's heart. It had severed a major vein, one that supplied blood to the very organ now struggling to keep him alive. The experienced surgeon examined the damage with a critical eye. His hands moved deftly as he assessed the torn vein with the precision born of decades of experience. Mr. Kensington had seen many wounds over the years, and the outcomes for this type were rarely favourable. Most of the patients he treated in these circumstances were young, often teenage boys courting gang violence in London. Some did not make it to theatre. Those who did often found themselves back in the same situation, trapped in an endless cycle of violence. But this patient was different. A man in his early 30s, properly groomed and well dressed. What on earth had led him to accident and emergency with a knife wound? Mr. Kensington spent the next few hours on the wound and finally stitched it carefully, knowing it was now up to his patient's body to heal. "We've done all we can," he murmured to the team as he wiped the sweat from his brow. "Now we wait." The young nurse cleared the used instruments and sorted them for disposal or sterilization. The surgeon removed his mask and apron as Edward was wheeled out of the operating theatre. He was exhausted. And the hardest part was yet to come, explaining the extent of Edward's injuries to his family, as sniffles turned into sobs. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out into the waiting room to deliver the news no one really wanted to hear. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Romans 3:23.